right, I've got Alex Olshonsky with me from Deep Fix. My brother, it's really good to have you on the show. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Ben, such an honor to be here. I'm also quite excited. Thanks for having me.
So, Alex, you are a friend from the Bay Area, and we met online a few years ago, and we just clicked. I think we're on similar paths. And I finally got to meet you this year when I went down to San Francisco for a men's weekend. We went for a hike, and I'm just feeling good. I'm feeling good, man. We just did some breath work before jumping into this, and a little bit, a little bit high and very present. Um, so, geez, where to start, man? Um, I know you have a story that involves addiction and addiction in the tech world and in the startup world of San Francisco. And I think people would be really interested in that part of your story. And you got into recovery, and that's another thing that we align on. And I'd love to talk about addiction recovery today. And at some point, plant medicines also became a part of your journey. And
Mhm.
now you are a support for people doing that work and um, getting all kinds of certifications for yourself and really just trying to carry um, plant medicines in the right way. So I'm excited to dig into this stuff. I think there's a lot of nuance in this subject that needs to be explored for people because it's not a one size fits all. Neither is addiction recovery. So, your
Yeah.
story, I think, is really important for people to hear. The way that you do things with plant medicines is very important for people to hear. And let's go, man.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds great. It was so good to meet you. And yeah, I think it was very affirming for me to meet you earlier on in my path and for you to validate the journey that I was on, which was at the time a little bit more controversial in the recovery space. So
Mhm.
a lot of appreciation for you.
Yeah, I definitely want to cover that juncture as well. That's something that had a big impact on me when I made the turn from what would be called like a traditional recovery path in the 12 steps to integrating other medicines and other traditions into my path. So why don't we start with your story? Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, you can start wherever you want, but imagine I don't really know who you are, and tell me, how did you get to where you are here? What are the important elements of your story that I would need to know?
Yeah, well, one thing I want to say right off the bat is that, as you know, as someone who's been in a lot of recovery rooms and has given this talk probably quite a bit, like you can find grooves where you hit your points, and that story that I identify with, particularly of being someone who worked in tech and had a lot of things that I thought were important and then lost all those things.
Hmm.
Um, I'm trying to like actively detach a little bit from the narrative that I've been telling myself and spilling on podcasts and in the recovery rooms. And so I feel good about like also trusting you and just I say that just to hold the intention that I'm going to try to explore that question you asked in a new way here. And so I think maybe what's important, where to start with my story was someone who always felt in between two worlds. And so, on the one hand, growing up in outside of DC, I was surrounded by a lot of wealth and a culture that it was very consumerist, and I wasn't raised wealthy or consumerist, yet that had an impact. And we were essentially there was a track to take, which was to hustle as hard as you can to get into a good college, and then make money. And I thought
Hmm.
that that's what it was about. And I hadn't really thought about life on any deeper level of my own understanding. And so I hustled my way into an Ivy League school. And there I found myself again further surrounded by wealth and access. And it only actually fueled my imposter syndrome. And underneath a lot of this was, I think, a pretty simmering and existential insecurity about, who I was in these worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And um,
So,
that, yeah, go
like
ahead.
a
Yeah.
feeling like you don't belong
Yeah.
in
A
some way.
feeling like I don't belong. And I think that the way that I was able to find belonging was actually through drugs and through partying. And so that party boy persona, which I definitely had cultivated in high school, went to like another level in college, where I was a DJ. I was DJ Olo. That's why my nickname is
Yeah.
Olo. And so I also had some activities that, for the sake of this podcast, maybe we can call like miscellaneous import export, entrepreneurial pursuits, and that, like, simultaneously, by being at this amazing school and getting to study existentialist philosophers and really having like a true small liberal arts college education, where intellectually I was heading towards like a path of like deep existential meaninglessness, and using that as a rationalization to break the rules and to cheat and to do drugs. And that, yeah, that really formed a crux of my identity, where because I found myself in this wild university, I then, or it's actually a college technically, I found a way to fit in and to gain like almost superficial popularity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, what I think, what that taught me, the lesson that it taught me, was that my antics could be rewarded, and particularly like doing drugs and breaking the rules and being, I had a deep contrarian streak. I thought that was like a real asset. And so
Mm-hmm.
then I ended up going to the Bay Area right after graduation, and going to a college like Dartmouth College, it very much filters you into a mindset that you are destined to work in either finance, investment banking, or management consulting.
Right.
Like, this is what all my peers were doing, all my friends. And however, when we graduated in 2009, we were in the Great Recession and the markets were in the tank,
Yeah.
and so none of those jobs that were supposed to be promised to us were there. And so that was almost, I think that's an interesting thread that I think about, because a lot of millennials, we were promised this life that the baby boomers had. And yet at so many steps along the way, we were kind of hit with the doses of reality, where it's like, oh, actually, you're probably not going to have the white picket fence and the better job. And that isn't necessarily what's going to happen to you,
Mm-hmm.
this American dream, quote unquote.
Was that something that you wanted? Like, did you want to work in finance or yeah?
So I think so. Because the thing is that I wasn't thinking for myself on a deeper level. I actually studied English in college, and so my major was, I studied existentialist philosophy. I studied poetry. I did my senior year independent study and thesis on the lyrical poetry of Bob Dylan and Wallace Stevens, and so my interests like were always more in the arts and in thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yet again, like this cultural conditioning that I think I was raised in. And also, I am a second generation American Jew with a Holocaust lineage. One of the ways that we assert our fundamental intrinsic worth as humans is by winning accolades in academia or the marketplace,
Mm-hmm.
or the arts. But for whatever reason, the marketplace and earning big bucks, I thought that that's what I wanted to do. And so the short answer to your question is yes. I did want to do whatever I could to make money, and I think that what that really represents is that if you don't come up with your own values and dreams and goals, you will default to society's, which in
Mm-hmm.
my case was, status and wealth.
Yeah, that is such a good point. Yeah, isn't it interesting how vulnerable you are when you're 20 years old to your
Yeah.
surroundings, to the culture around you, to the messages of what everyone else says that you should do, and to the feedback that you get from your environment when you act a certain way, right? And how easy it is to end up with a code for a living that is way misaligned from what your heart wants, right? Or it's like knowing you now. hearing this part of your story, I'm like, oh, this guy was like way out of integrity with what he
Yeah.
truly wanted. And at the time, you had no idea, right? You
Right.
thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do to be successful. All these people like me. I like my life. Like, I just want to keep building on what I've got here. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's extremely well said, and I think it's important and too, and this is what I was alluding to earlier about like detaching from my story a little bit, is that um, I see now that there was a deep soul misalignment at the time, but also at the time, like, don't let me get it twisted. I was partying and I was having fun and doing drugs, and these were still, as the saying goes, part of the good times,
Yeah.
right? Where the drugs were still working and this life that I thought I was living, um, I hadn't reached that point of crisis. And there's so much more to say too, around like why it is that these young, capable men in our society don't go through rites of passage. We don't have rituals, and we end up just defaulting to, in my case, a very corporate. I think I was fundamentally denying this like deep artistry and curiosity that lives in me. But at the time, if I heard myself, I would have been like, that guy is full of it. That
Yeah.
guy is like
Yeah.
new age, and so yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good point you make there.
Yeah. I agree with you on the rites of passage and the mentorship piece. I think we're missing. You didn't say mentorship, but that's what I thought when you said it. Is like we're really missing mentorship from mature men. Young men
Mhm.
are missing mentorship, deep mentorship from older men who are more established, who have been through this, who have been through a young life and realize like where they were lying to themselves and what it really means to be a man, to be in service to community, to yeah, there's so much there. And looking back at my own story, I realized like, oh yeah, I was shaped by like I went through rehab when I was 16, and then I went back and I worked at that treatment center, and so I was
Right.
shaped by that culture there.
Hmm.
And for better or worse, there were some great things there, and there were some not so great things. And um, still, it took me 5 to 10 years to really break out of that and really find myself. Luckily, that was
Hmm.
a pretty darn good place to be rubbing off on me. Being a
Yeah.
counselor, and in the absence of that, I see how it kind of like it may have saved my life. Being in that
Yeah.
particular culture. So, and I mean, I I definitely thought of this recently when I saw the news about this Buffalo massacre. Where
Mm.
this 18-year-old kid walks in and shoots 13 people, 11 of whom are black. Just thinking about what it must have been like to be in his head and how sure he was of what he was doing, that like he was doing some kind of a good thing, you know,
Yeah.
like he was cleaning
T-
up the world. Like how backwards your mind has to be, but you can get that way, especially at that age. When you see some injustice or you see how like things are built wrong, and you're like, I have the power to clean this up, and this is the right way. I'm going to go enforce
mhm.
this on the world. You're very impressionable at that age.
Yeah, totally. And I think that to your point from the Jungian lens, that at that age you're very ripe to be susceptible to this idea of being the hero,
Mm,
and yet, as you know, as someone who's steeped in this type of mythopoetic realm, the hero is actually still a manifestation of boyhood psychology.
yeah,
Right, where you're not actually integrating what you're
yeah,
learning, and you haven't given back and haven't shared whatever it is that you've been through or learned. And so, yeah, the I mean, it's this moment of time with these shootings, particularly in America. It's hard, and it's particularly around these white men who are like I mean, it's hard to process how frequently this all happens.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we're no exception in Canada. We've got 10% of the population of you folks, and I think sometimes we look down on the U.S. At the shootings, and
Hmm.
sure enough, after a little while, looking down on you guys, we have one of our own. It happens, it
Right.
happens here. So, we're just as lost up here. So you're in your lost years and feeling good about it, feeling sure
Well,
about it.
yeah, I was, and so it's interesting because one thing that has also recently, I've, as I, and I'm working on a memoir where really it's like an extra, I'm digging into my own psyche to better understand what happened. And even right after college, so I got a job in finance, right after graduating college. It was the only job I could get, and it was at Edward Jones, where I had to get registered as a Series 7, Series 66, pass all those exams, and then go door to door in Redwood City, which is not the wealthiest neighborhood in the Bay Area, but it's not poor. And, if you can imagine me, and I was smoking, bowls of cannabis in my car on the way, like hating myself, wearing a suit in 2009 in the worst recession in, a decade, going knocking on doors like and saying, hey, like, I'm the guy who should be handling your 401k and life savings. It's a
Wow.
model that works really well in rural areas in the deep south where you're like the smartest guy in their town, and
Yeah.
so they just give you your money. But it was almost like mind-boggling that this was a job, and that created a lot of dissonance and internal pain that I just buried. And so, for instance, and I say all this knowing that, when you talk about the Ivy League, like it's hard not to probably sound like a douche because these problems are all relativistic, and I had a lot of benefits in my life. So I say that by saying, though, after going to a school like Dartmouth and then having a job like that, which was not the type of job you're really supposed to get, and then that led me, I only did that for about a year and then moved into sales and tech. Like, it's kind of looked down upon in a certain sense. And so you're supposed to get a little bit more, quote unquote, or this is what I thought, prestigious jobs. And so me defaulting into sales, where I was essentially using some of my just innate interpersonal skills and hustler and entrepreneurial proclivities,
Yeah.
that like I was holding some real insecurity and burying that. And that's when the drug use picked up,
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm just imagining people slamming doors on you for a year, and I'm impressed that you lasted that long. There was a time
I think it
where,
was 9 months. Let me be clear.
oh wow, it's still, I mean, at one point I took a job with Shaw, which is they provide internet, and at the time I think maybe there was a competitor. Anyways, they were trying to like go from 94% saturation to 100% saturation in the city of Calgary, and I joined what's called the street teams, where you go knocking door to door around dinner time, and you ask people if they have Shaw and if they want it, and you offer them some kind of a deal. I lasted one day because I got so many doors slammed, and I had kids come up to me and tell me to go away. Like their parents would be being polite with me at the door, and the kid would go away, yell at me like, you're stealing time from our parents. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh man, I really, really don't want to be here. I couldn't give a shit about Shaw and selling their services. What am I doing right now? And I quit after one day. So nine
Well, good for
months,
you.
impressive.
Yeah, and I will say, even like in my case too, like we were supposed to do handwritten logs of the people that you met, and at some point I stopped knocking on doors and just started going up to people in Starbucks, and then pretty quickly started just mostly making up a lot of the
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and this is something that my parents and some other folks were like, "This is great experience. You're earning your grit."
Hmm.
And maybe, but then also, like, what about the experience of like deep existential internal disharmony and just shoving that away?
Yeah.
Like, is that really a good experience? Like, whose ideas are these that this is like somehow good for a young man
Hmm.
to do something that absolutely they hate?
Well, it actually makes sense considering that like you thought what you wanted was to be in finance, right? And so you're going to go work some entry level job and you're going to earn some grit. But uh, everybody, including you, kind of didn't know that there was a deep existential issue going on and a
Yeah,
lack of meaning. And this job wasn't pointing you towards your highest high. It was
right,
totally off track.
right. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
yeah, you that started to hit home. I guess, after a little while, and you shifted.
Yeah, and then I got into tech, and actually through the Dartmouth network got into tech, and this was 2000 and early the beginning of 2010, and so it was a different. It's hard to imagine for folks, but it was truly a different landscape then. Silicon Valley had its emerging giants, but it hadn't exploded into the industry that is ubiquitous around the world today. Um, and I got a job at Salesforce, which essentially is the cornerstone of CRM or customer relationship interactions. And
Mhm.
this was back when the cloud, like, I don't know if I know this, bringing software into the cloud, like, was a really new, sexy
Yeah.
idea. And it had a world-class training program. And I did really well there in sales and hustled. I also, and so it was weird because on the one hand, I was getting promoted and accolades and winning, being elected team lead and things of that nature. Yet also, this is when I started waking up with cold sweats and shivering and finding myself in actually quite of a severe pickle, where at the time, because thanks to all the philosophy I thought I studied and understood, I was a materialist rationalist. And so when this withdrawal emerged, I thought that I was dealing with strictly a physical problem. Things like around addiction. It wasn't even necessary. Like, I knew that this was something like addiction, but any further understanding of what was happening in my mind was like, oh, I've been taking these painkillers. They create physical dependency. When you stop them, that causes problems.
Mhm.
This is purely a physical problem. And so, yeah, that's when I think also the drugs really became this crutch and this rationalization to help support this now budding tech career.
Uh-huh.
Um,
So
yeah.
what I hear you saying is that the tech career was still out of alignment, and that's not something that you were able to see because essentially you're living in a very loud place, and you've got other louder things happening in your body, like physical dependency, like your addiction. Uh,
Yeah. Well, I would say that it was a lot of things in my life were out of alignment. After Salesforce, I was recruited and joined Twitter, and this was in 2011, and I was there for a good stretch of time, and that was very exciting and it
mhm.
was very cool. We were having celebrities and actors come into the office just because this was when we were still the good guys.
Right.
And
It
when
was the very beginning, right?
it was the very beginning, and the Arab Spring was tweeting live. We had every reason to believe that we were actually a legitimate force for good in the world, buttresses of free speech, pillars of the town square and
Mhm.
democracy, and also the team that I was helping build and scale on our ads platform was developing a very new way to advertise, which was native advertising. And so rather than a billboard or your traditional banner ad, it could be a tweet, which is actually content, and it feels and looks like it's part of the real conversation. So in a lot of ways, what we were doing was exciting and groundbreaking. And I, at that time, I did not. Yeah, I don't know if it's safe to say that it was out of alignment. I think more how I reflect back on it was that there were a lot of tinsel and bells and whistles and people reaching out to me wanting to join and being like, oh my God, you work at Twitter? That's so cool.
Mhm.
That kept me from ever still thinking deeper about what it is that I might be good at and how I actually might want to spend my time.
Mhm.
So yeah. And then throughout the drug addiction just got more and more severe and serious.
So yeah, what was it? Was it a mix of alcohol, painkillers?
Yeah.
What were you
Yeah.
using?
So I was a polysubstance addict, meaning that I had a serious addiction to multiple substances. I like to say that I liked cocaine, I loved cannabis, but I needed oxy.
Mhm.
And for me, I smoked cannabis every day since I was 16 until I got sober, multiple times a day, every single day. I drank very, very heavily. I did a lot of cocaine and amphetamines. That Adderall was part. I was treating myself like a biohacking space chemist,
Mhm.
taking uppers to grind through my workday, taking benzos to take the edge off particularly when I had speaking engagements. I was traveling around the country and presenting at clients. And uh, one of the things that's interesting is that when I actually finally, I mean, there's more to it. I'm condensing the story, but when I finally, for the real, got my act together and got off everything, and then public speak, I like couldn't public speak. I was experiencing all of the nerves in ways that, I think about just about anyone could take, or at least anyone like me could take a bunch of, coke and benzos and opiates and crush a big public speaking gig, because you're just not in your body.
Right.
And so I had to relearn a lot of things.
Amazing. Hey, like the way to crush a speaking gig is to not be in your body. And then if you are, you can't, you're stuck.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I was like, oh, I'm a good public speaker. And so then when I kind of almost had borderline panic attacks later when I was off everything, it was disturbing to say the least.
Yeah, I think this is really important for people to hear, actually, that some people can get into a place in their life where if they're not under the influence of something, they feel way out of whack,
Right.
uncomfortable, not myself. I can't do this. I can't have a basic conversation. And when they are under the influence and when it's the right brew, they're just firing on all cylinders and they're feeling like they're on top of the world, and they're performing, they're killing it, right? There is addiction, the world of addiction. Like, people think, when they think addiction, they think of sort of a particular thing. And sometimes that's the incoherent homeless guy on the street mumbling, or the drunk, but there's also this like drug fueled, high performing guy that you're describing, that
Right.
I think people need to get that like addiction takes many forms. It looks very different in each person,
Yeah.
right?
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the term, that was also something that I really identified with, that, oh, I'm a high functioning addict.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what does that really mean? I mean, and we can talk maybe more about this later, but really that label is a way to differentiate the wealthy between the poor. And as I learned in my own story, no addiction will remain high functioning if you keep continuing down the road. And eventually that's what led me to change, is because that I just stopped being able to function and perform. But in the case of just going back to like my time, even back when I was at Salesforce, when I noticed this happening, I didn't think to go to AA. I knew I couldn't go to rehab because there was this deep shame, and there was still the stigma where I kept this all a secret, because I was just so embarrassed, because again, someone like me, a guy like me, wasn't supposed to be running around the worst neighborhoods in San Francisco and scoring drugs and then getting addicted to those drugs. Um, and so that kept me pursuing healing in secret. And so when I say healing, I mean, what I did literally was cold call doctors in the phone book. Like, I think this was like, and I'm not even exaggerating, this was in 2010. I went down the list of doctors who had a specialty in addiction medicine, and the doctor who ended up taking me, his name begins with an A. And so like, I got really lucky that he took me in, and yet I still went through many failed starts of like hybrid treatment in secret, and like did that and failed through that for over the course of 5 years or so before I hit my bottom. But yeah, the point being that like the identities that we hold around being high functioning, and the stigma around addiction as being a moral failing, or at least that's how I thought it was, that really kept me in this trap.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, what led you to your bottom, and what did that look like?
So okay, so what essentially happened was, as the years went on, and even at Twitter, I made some money, and in equity. Twitter IPO'd, and again throughout the way, I was getting these validations that the path I was on was actually working quite well,
Mm-hmm.
and that it was, like, you got in at a hot social media company, and it wasn't crazy life-changing money, and I don't come from money, but I made money, and then that just like took me into overdrive, and I started partying and revved up the drug usage more and more, and essentially spent through a pretty over the course of a couple of years, spent through a pretty insane amount of money and on having like a $300 to $400 a day habit on multiple substances. And throughout, my physical health deteriorated. I had gotten married to my college sweetheart. And then also, this is when the quote unquote drugs stopped working. And so after leaving Twitter and working at like a really aggressive startup with a hustle culture with a lot of drug usage, I started like getting in fights with CEOs, and I was advising a lot of startups at this point, and basically was just like a hothead and also not able to perform. And what ended up leading to my bottom, and at this time throughout my fresh marriage was experiencing a lot of challenges naturally, and I was lying, and there's just, that's a whole nother conversation. But I basically had gotten a job, despite being in like really bad shape, where I had spent through all my money that I had made. I had gotten myself almost 6 figures in debt, taking out loans to do more drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I was pawning electronics in between getting state unemployment checks because I was in between these startup jobs. I was still highly motherfucking employable. I can cuss here, right?
Yes.
I was like still like a bad, my LinkedIn profile, you would not know any of this stuff. And so I basically got a job at a company, Slack, which you've probably heard of,
Yes.
which at the time was another big unicorn. And I got a job that was essentially designed just for me to be the kind of head of sales strategy and build out this team. And there's more I could say about why that didn't work out, but I ended up getting let go after about 3 months. And that, on top of my marriage essentially being on the brink, was like a double stab to the gut, where I felt this, holy crap, this life that I'm living, it's just not working. And I need to Hey, are you there?
Hey,
Nice. Okay.
we're back.
I was like, damn, we were flowing. So I was like,
We were flowing.
it would suck if we had to do it again.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. Like, maybe it's. I wonder why it's dropping. I don't. I don't normally drop Zoom calls down here, so I
Yeah,
think
no
it.
sweat.
I think it's. It must be related to the weather, but it's amazing that it's just back up. So fuck yeah.
Well, I think I was actually, and you might be able to, I have like, you probably will have a recording where I was talking up until like the bottom, and then I realized you were gone. And so it might be
Right.
like, it actually could be perfect to just like pick back up. Um,
Yeah, where I saw you drop out was about 35 minutes and 30 seconds, something like that. You were talking about Slack. You said I got a job at Slack, and I
yeah,
I had been given a special job to build out a team.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
said and then it cut out. So if you want to start there, we'll just
yeah,
we'll
sure.
merge it.
Yeah. Okay. So despite in a lot of ways my health, finances, relationships that were most important to me deteriorating all around me, I still had a highly employable resume that was sought after. And I got a job at a budding startup, like another unicorn, quote unquote, which was a company called Slack. And I was to be on the sales operations and strategy team, and there was a path to really build this out, and it was a new role designed just for me and in my experience that would really align with my experience and was very exciting in that sense. And there's a lot I could say about that experience, but it only lasted 3 months.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I in despite, yeah, I mean, well, one, what I have to be careful also about what I say because I'm under
Yeah.
like
Right.
contract with it. But yeah, I got let go after 3 months, and that was after now like a few startups that had either ended in blowout fights or me being let go. And um,
So
simultaneous, go
you
ahead.
got let go because of your behavior or how you were showing up to the job at some
Yeah,
point?
well, actually, I had so it's there's a lot to unpack here, but I got let go. I was working on a team that was pretty chaotic at this time at the company, as a lot of startups are, and yeah, I was, the company moves fast. I was not in a great place, obviously.
Mhm.
And I was not performing. I was also just not vibing with the other leaders on that team. And yet I was still working from 6 a.m. till midnight every night I was like trying really hard. And so simultaneously throughout this time, like my family had staged an intervention where they were like, "What is going on with you?"
Mhm.
And I had admitted to them that was using drugs and had was ready to get help, and had, this was really hard for my wife, and now ex at the time, and because I had been lying to her
Mhm.
about that usage. And so there was a lot of stuff that was deteriorating. Yet I was like trying to regain control of my life. And in a sense, I actually had started treatment while I was still at Slack, taking lunch breaks to go do a hybrid outpatient treatment
Mm.
design for like high functioning executives. And so juggling that with a job that literally worked, I was working crazy hours. I mean, 80 hours a week or so. Um, and then when I got let go, uh, it hurt so bad, because this was the thing that I still had, the one area of control. And at the heart of my addiction, I understand now, is this distorted sense of wanting to control things. But I still
Mhm.
had this great career and all these a shiny, listing of badges on my LinkedIn profile
Yeah.
of tech all stars. And so when this happened, it hurt so bad because it was like, man, you can't fool anyone anymore. Like this,
Mhm.
it's obvious that this is just not working. And then, when I told it, Naturally, understandably, my ex wasn't thrilled to hear this news that I will have to find another job. And so it was almost like a 1-2 punch where I lost my job and it felt like I had lost my partner.
Mhm.
And it was like knives in the gut being twisted around. And that's when I was really brought to my knees in a profound way where I was just like, and you know how this goes. These are precious moments, these bottoms where I just said, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing with my life, and I need help, and I will try anything. And that like openness, that was the doorway, which I hadn't had because, again, like when I had started this treatment, even while I was at Slack, my plan was just to get off the opiates, and then I was already failing drug tests for cannabis and drinking because I was getting drug tests in
Right.
this program. But in my mind, I was like, because all the counselors would say, and my therapist, like, you have to get off everything, dude. This is not just a opiate problem. And I was like, yeah, right, sure. You don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of. It's just the opiates.
Yeah.
And so when then this happened, and when the 1-2 punch of like losing this job and feeling truly broken, I was like, okay, I got to do something. And it
Mhm.
was hard. And this was also when I started going to AA and like in tears.
Mhm.
And yeah, yeah,
So, yeah, I think that willingness that you're talking about, that willingness in your darkest moment is the difference between jumping off a bridge or blowing your brains out and finding the path that many people have walked. Many people have jumped off bridges and blown their brains out in that
yeah,
situation, but there are many people also who have found recovery from that dark place where you've lost everything. And what a contrast, eh? Like being on the other side of this, just listening to your story. Just minutes ago, you're talking about Twitter IPOing,
yeah,
and you're just on top of the world, like, "Hey, I'm winning,
yeah.
this is working," right?
Right,
and
right.
and and then you're just going to go rage in Silicon Valley and ride your success, and instead just it's just this like slow dissolving uh, of something that was coming for a long time that you didn't really see coming,
Right.
um, but gradually it became more and more obvious to you until this intervention hits. And I'm sensing that like you really did, when the intervention came, you were like, okay, yeah, like I do think the gig is up and I do want help. But you didn't know what the help entailed, which which
Right.
was like everything, having to get off everything.
Yeah, and how I would describe it, and you know this from your work as an addiction counselor, which is something I really appreciate you, is that I love my family, and I'm fortunate to have a family where addiction was very novel for them, and they had trouble understanding it, but they care about me, and they were my sister, they're supportive, and I didn't want to lose my marriage. I had a beautiful young wife, and so at the time when that happened, it was just like damage control. I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I want to keep this together.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until then, like having that. So that would, I'd say, like I cracked the door open. But then when I got laid off and was like finding myself alone, and losing the identity of having a successful tech career, of having a beautiful wife, like that. And granted, we didn't split up in that moment. We tried longer, but I kind of, it started unraveling,
Hmm.
and that's when I just was ready to try it spiritually. Was ready to try anything.
Hmm. So what happened? Where did you go? Did you go to rehab?
So I was still actually in this outpatient program. And so I remember having to tell the group, and that, by the way, doing this treatment group was the first time I had done group therapy in my life. And it was so hard and I hated it. And so I hadn't done any of the men's work, and now I'm a facilitator. And so it's really
Yeah.
funny that like at this time because I was really concerned about the stigma and keeping it a secret, keeping this whole thing a secret, and living. And I had a true double life where these activities took place, um, and and so I was in that program, and that's when I committed to stop everything, stop smoking cannabis, stop drinking, and I then started going to AA meetings,
Mhm.
and I got very fortunate to find a group of men in particular in Oakland, that AA community, who welcomed me. And it was very helpful to have older men in particular, given what I was going through in my relationship and being out of work and having a lot of time on my hands. And so we did 90 and 90. I went to multiple
Mm-hmm.
meetings a day for
Mm-hmm.
every day, and probably went to a meeting every day for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then throughout, that led me into studies of Buddhism, and I got into Against the Stream, or refuge recovery, which is Buddhist-based recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that led me to yoga, and eventually I found my way towards plant medicines when I was about a year into recovery. Yeah, I'm someone who I very much, and I think you and I are probably aligned in this sense, where I went through the steps and I did them in earnest, and I benefited greatly from them. And I did service. I took service jobs at meetings. And for a guy like me to be humbled in that way and going to all sorts of different meetings around the Bay Area with all sorts of different people, like, that was very healing, to just where you see that I'm actually no different than these folks
Mm-hmm.
who are, coming in off the street or out of prison. And they're my brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, so I've benefited a lot from that framework, but I also understand why there are people who might not align right with the 12 steps or
Mm-hmm.
that community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm someone who I think can hold that nuance, where I've personally benefited from it, but I also get why people might move away or not feel drawn to it.
Me too. Yeah, a lot of people know that I spent a long time in AA, and I ended up working at a treatment center. So I was teaching concepts from the 12 steps and going through the steps with people and sitting. In the end, I ended up sitting with people for step five. Step five is a big deal. A person
Yeah.
basically sits and talks about every bad thing they ever did. And in some formats, it's kind of like, let's hear your life story with all the darkest stuff
Right.
included, right? And so it
Yeah.
can take a full day. It can be this, like what you and I are doing right now, times 8, and
Right.
deeper. Um, and I see how it can seem really disempowering, like kicking people when they're down, like telling them that they're powerless and like
Hmm.
you're hopeless. And I talked to some friends about this the other day. They said, like, well, on the surface, like, I observed an AA meeting once and it seemed so disempowering. I don't understand it, you know.
Right.
And I I explained to them, uh, to summarize, basically, that all those steps are built for a reason. And a big part of the blunt language in AA and the 12 steps has to do with cutting through denial
Right.
and arrogance and grandiosity that often comes with
Exactly.
addiction. Even when a person observably is in tatters and is in the worst part of their life, they're still usually filled with denial, arrogance, grandiosity. I can do this. I don't need help. And
I'm different.
I'm
I'm not like
different.
these guys. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And AA initially, and the groups and the way that people talk, it's like a 2x4 smacking you in the head. And you need some kind of a blunt force trauma to break through the fog that every addict is living in. And part of your blunt force trauma was that intervention and the possibility of losing your marriage and being fired all at the same time. You got
Yeah.
you got leveled, you got suplexed, and
Right. Yeah, that's
that's
the dump truck, as they say, right?
yeah.
There's the feather, the brick, and then eventually that motherfucking dump truck is gonna come
Yeah.
and take you out. And yeah, you make a really good point too, Ben, because one of the main critiques that AA gets is this notion that you need to right size yourself, and by right size, that means get your ego in check. And in the case, I can only speak to about my own experience. I understand why there might be, in particular, like women in particular underrepresented communities who really don't resonate with that ideology, because they feel like I'm already pretty much oppressed. But in my case, that I needed to get humbled, and so that framework really helped. And I'd say that, one, learning that I'm no different, like, it was truly an existential learning that, that when we talk about this a bigger notion of, like, separateness being an illusion between people, like, I learned that experientially, going through really gnarly parts of the tenderloin and in my addiction, and having this like drug dealing, this life, right?
Yeah.
With folks that I really wasn't supposed to be hanging out with, and then also then meeting those same folks in recovery rooms
In the
and
meetings.
realizing that I actually was right where I needed to be. And I didn't have money, and I was in debt, and my health was a mess, and my relationships were a mess as well. And so in my case, it actually helped quite a bit, that philosophy.
Me too. Here we are, two straight white millennial males who
Right.
benefited from that program, right? And I, I have a lot of friends who are like me who also benefited from that program, and uh, for better or worse, I actually think for better, that program, the first program, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, kind of refuses to change. They refuse to change their text. Uh, they don't want to mess with something that worked.
Right.
And one beautiful thing about the 12 steps is that they're applicable, and you can take them and change them into whatever you want. Like they're kind of like
Exactly.
an open source structure that you can take and build another software program, another recovery program. And that is what happened with AA. You ended up with the second one was, I think, was Al-Anon, was for codependents,
Right.
family members of alcoholics, and they apply the 12 steps to their lives and their need to control and control other
Yeah.
people, right?
Hmm.
And then you had all these other spinoffs to happen there: Cocaine Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous,
Right.
Marijuana Anonymous, Gamblers
Sex,
Anonymous.
love. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and there's hundreds now, and there are subgroups within each of those for particular minorities that want to meet, and so that they can align on their particular issues. There's gay
Right.
and lesbian meetings in AA, and there's men's meetings, there's women's meetings, and um,
And can I just chime in on that real
yeah,
quickly? Because
yeah,
I think that is and this is something that my addiction doctor told me at the time, and um, like how powerful it is to be able to be literally, you can be in any country in the world, and you can find an English speaking AA meeting at
yeah,
any time.
yeah.
And like when we're talking about people who need acute help, who don't have resources or money to do other options, like that is very powerful,
Hmm.
to just know that like this community exists. And so in my case, I want to say that it was the community. And then also the something that I think can't be critiqued about AA, and is like literally, people can critique it, but like I won't let him touch it, is the notion of service and giving back. And like right away, whether that's cleaning up the coffee or doing the books, it doesn't have to be in a grand sense helping another addict, but actually just committing your life to other people, and not just yourself. Like that to me really resonated.
Hmm.
And then I do want to say too, and I'm curious, like, um, I also, after about a year in the program, really started looking around the rooms and at myself, and having all this great growth, and feeling like it can't end here though. I
Hmm.
feel like there's more.
Hmm.
And this is something that one of my colleagues, who is a big pioneer in the use of 12 steps and psychedelics, Todd Young's, we debate about, because if you can engage with the steps at depth and continue on your path, but for whatever reason, I did feel like I had hit a stopping point, or like I hit a cap. And
Hmm.
that's, I know that for some people, they could say, oh, you just need to go deeper into the teachings, but in my case, I felt like I had reached that cap, that ceiling. And I know that's an idea that also, one of the things that gravitated me towards you, Ben, is like your notion of second stage recovery, which I
Yeah,
think is a really beautiful, concept.
yeah. The same thing happened for me. I was in for 15 years,
Wow. Yeah.
from from I guess age 15 to about 30, and yeah, I felt like I was topping out as well. I had been counseling and teaching on the topics, and I had gone to school and got a degree in addictions counseling, and I had worked at multiple treatment centers, and so I was privy to the research coming out of different areas, and I was starting to see like, oh, look at what happened with mushrooms over there at this university, and look what they're doing with MDMA over there for trauma survivors. And so that started cracking some of the structure that had been built by AA and the 12 steps, and the the way that they see addiction, and the
Yeah.
way that they see how addiction recovery works. And I had been introduced to this concept of second stage recovery when I was in university. And same thing for me. I felt like I was topping out and like I really needed to bridge out and explore. And, uh, you know, for it's this sort of instinct is for better or for worse. And early on, it's for worse because you end up being a multi drug user.
Right. Right.
Like you said,
Right. Right.
polysubstance drug use,
Right.
polysubstance addiction. There, there's that need to like explore. Oh, I want some of this, and I want some of that. I want some of this,
Right.
and 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 that obviously can get the best of you, and it can get the best of you in recovery too, if you're not really conscious about choosing your direction. But yeah, it sounds like we both did the same kind of thing. We started to see the cracks, and we wanted to go through them and explore what was on the other side
Right.
there. And so I did that with a friend after many conversations, and understanding that if I made that step, that I was technically relapsed in that
Exactly.
community.
Yeah, right.
Scary.
And which is such, it's so scary. And I think that that's a really important point. And this is something that I know you and I have riffed on when we have our more philosophical talks about addiction. But this AA really instills in you the notion that addiction is a disease, and a chronic disease, meaning that it is something that you have the rest of your life, that you, if you don't tend to with the steps and your meanings, will kill you. And it
Mhm.
is, it will creep up on you. And so you're, the very notion that you might want to try a psychedelic or actually spend time away from the program, that's just, your ego, that's your addiction manifesting and and
Mhm.
and tricking you into doing something out of alignment. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I do think it's also worth underscoring. And I think that's what primarily like the gravitas that you have, that drew me to you. And when I first reached out to you, is like, it takes a lot of courage to be in that community and steeped in that paradigm. And I can't imagine after 15 years, I was only like a year in. But then to be like, you know what, actually still nonetheless, I'm going to try something that I'm going to try something different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a huge step, man. And when I teach the disease concept to people now, um, I tell them that it's a useful concept to consider, and that I'm not going to tell you that because of this here, uh, you can never use any substance ever again, and that you'll
Hmm.
always be um, diseased, right? Uh,
Right.
but what would be the value of you stepping into this theory and seeing it as your current state for the
Yeah.
next year or two or three? And I've seen many people find real freedom in it. There is like a whole paper called The Disease Concept of Alcoholism, and I'm
Right.
sure there's one that's called The Disease Concept of Addiction. But I've had many clients read that and go, oh my god, like this explains it.
Totally.
Like this releases a lot of the shame that I was like, I literally thought that I was broken,
Right.
and that I could not be repaired, and
Right. Right.
that I should feel ashamed for that, and like it was all sort of intertwined. And this helps me understand, like, oh, this is like an illness. This is an illness, and there's a
Yes.
treatment.
Yeah, I was sick. Yes, and particularly, so yeah, I would expand on your definition, which I love, which is, it's a useful concept at a useful time, and that time is early on.
Yes.
Particularly early on, because not only for yourself but for your friends and family,
Mm,
right? To say, hey, like I am sick. I was sick, and I have something that, it does. It can be such a relief to learn that, okay, this is not a moral failing. I'm at, and for instance, in my case, I had to I had to make amends and reckon with a lot of cheating and lying and stealing and behavior that is still hard to talk about. Even now, I'm just noticing, like,
mhm,
it doesn't feel good. I've
mhm,
noticed like a tension in my gut, as I, even in just a little sadness in my eyes. Um, And so to have that framework and to be able to share that with your loved ones, it can be very powerful early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the risk of getting stuck in that is that you stop growing. And you there are plenty of people who live out their lives sticking to that program, and that's enough for them. And I totally respect that. But I know that for you and for me, it wasn't enough. And every once in a while, my mom says to me, "Oh, you're such an alcoholic, or you're such an addict." Like she'll see
Mm-hmm.
some personality trait in me, and she'll mention that, and I look at
Yeah.
her like, "Wow, like I you don't see me. Like you see me through this lens of the
Right.
program that you're a part of." And I realize how much I've let go of that when I hear her say that, because it's just not a part of my framework anymore. But it used to be.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Totally, man. That what that brings up for me, and my parents, God bless them. Um, they when I talk to them to this day, and now how things are going in my life is just, things are going well, right? And I'm getting myself more out there in the public sphere, and I'm healthy, and I've got now a beautiful new partner, and um, sometimes that when I talk to them and catch up, there's always a bit of like, hey, like, but you're good, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like you're healthy, you're okay, you know. And it just reminds me, and it just, I can't, it's hard for me. I'm not a parent, but it's hard to imagine how difficult that would be,
Yeah.
to witness, someone you care about go through something that might be really hard to understand.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we get reminded of it, even if I personally, like you, I don't identify with the disease model, mostly because I've seen people, whether in Buddhist meditation communities or plant medicine communities, like radically heal themselves in a way that I can say that and they're actually able to integrate a substance in right relationship, as
Hmm.
the Buddha would say, in ways that is truly remarkable. And I'm not saying that I'm encouraging that for anyone, but for those reasons, I hadn't identified with that framework yet. I'm always reminded, and like it is something that, and particularly as a writer in the work that I do now, like addiction lives within all of us, and
Hmm.
and it's kind of like addiction all the way down.
Hmm.
And yet, though, there's people still, they don't tend to look at their phone habits or whatever it might be. They
Yeah.
tend to not look at that as
Right.
an addiction, because what you and I went through, ending up in rehab, or being in serious debt, and like not having your quote unquote shit together, that it's obvious to everyone.
Hmm. Hmm. So, yeah. So let's. I mean, I think we're not going to come back to AA here, but this was a great conversation about 12 steps. By the way, I think people, might really benefit from this. And there is a subgroup that I actually haven't spent much time in, but there's like a 12 steps, psychedelics and the
In
12
recovery.
steps. Yeah.
Yeah, psychedelics, PIR. Yeah, my colleague Todd Youngs, he's one of the founding kind of members of that
Uh-huh.
program, and
Right.
yeah, and so yeah, they're applying a 12-step framework with the intentional use of psychedelics to aid in the spiritual process,
Hmm.
of growth and recovery. Which is, yeah. So this is all changing so fast.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Th-
It's wild, frankly.
that would have been helpful for me 7 years ago when I was making that jump. I felt like I was just jumping into hyperspace, just the middle of nowhere. Um, but it makes sense, and it's good to know that that's out there. So, yeah, how did you get involved with biomedicines, and
Hmm.
what made you make that jump?
Yeah. Well, when it comes, the particular medicine that I work with is ayahuasca, and I had with ayahuasca, they talk about how you can hear its call, and like it has a plant consciousness that almost like summons and beckons to people. And I had actually first heard it when I was in the midst of my addiction, when I met a man who had told me about it, and I thought secretly, because this was still when everything was a secret, I was like, oh, that could be the way out of this horrible thing that I have. And when I got really bad, I actually looked for this person's number. I've written a story about this,
Yeah,
and I
I
couldn't find
remember.
it, and
Yeah.
it wasn't meant to be at that time. And then when I was exactly pretty much a year into my recovery, I had just tapered off Suboxone. Suboxone is an opiate antagonist that is used to help people who have severe dependency safely wean off opioids without wrecking, and coming into really, I was on a level at which the withdrawal could be dangerous. And so I had to do a medically supervised opioid, amphetamine and benzo taper. And so after 9 months, I was finally off all that,
Wow.
even though I was still in recovery. And by the way, just another thing to say, I had kept that a secret in the 12 steps, because there's a lot of people who would say, oh, you're not technically sober if you're still on Suboxone. And so there's controversy and nuance all the way around with these topics. And nonetheless, when I was a year into recovery, one of my friends had told me about a community that he had met to do that was working with ayahuasca. And I was just deepening into my studies of Buddhism and yoga, and I felt like this real like I was consuming psychology and contemplative traditions. Like that was now my double life, where I was now working and rebuilding a tech career, yet spending my times at nights and weekends like going so deep into these realms. And so it felt like a natural step, and I felt very drawn to it. And I had also considered myself a psychonaut, meaning like an explorer of altered states of consciousness. And I felt very confident in my abilities to handle, a hallucinogen, ayahuasca being a little bit more of like the Mount Everest when it comes to these things. And
Big
so,
mama. Yeah.
yeah. And I went and I did it. And, I don't like this could be a whole podcast on its own, but ayahuasca is typically done, you do a dieta where you diet to prepare eating vegan food, no negative stimulation, sugar. So there's already this cleansing and intentionality leading up into the ceremony with journaling and really like changing your paradigm before you even participate in it. And I thought that was very exciting. And on the first night of ceremony, it's typically done in a series of ceremonies. It blasted me open in a way that was so thunderously explosive, radically alive, imaginative, and otherworldly, that and this is a cliche, but I knew I was forever a changed man. And what it really did, I think, on that first night was just totally dissolve the materialist, intellectual atheist, this tenuous philosophy and worldview that I had been clinging to, that I thought that, I knew intellectually that the universe was a cold and mechanical place. And then when you're thrown into a world where you see that the entire universe is a living organism, and consciousness likely, in my opinion, pervades all things, as psychedelics often, help elicit that panpsychist idea. I knew I was changed. And then on the second night, I had the hardest night of my life. And I was sent into a place of absolute, utter insanity and fear, and unfortunately, was surrounded by very skilled and experienced facilitators. And that, for me, again, as someone who had just reclaimed so many things in my life when it comes to like my recovery, I'd been to rebuild my relationship, been rebuilding my tech career. And then in that moment, to feel like I had crossed the threshold and actually had made a really awful mistake. It's like, oh my God, you do ayahuasca and you just blew everything. In that, there's so much to unravel there, but that loss of control and utter insanity that I experienced ended up actually changing me more than the first night, when it was all just bliss in higher realms. And because basically after that second night, there was something nagging at me, like, what do you not understand about yourself? And what was it that you experienced in that state? And so that just further fueled my curiosity, and I went even deeper into all these studies. Because when I did ayahuasca, I kind of realized that yoga, meditation, these things that I had been studying, like they're all synergistic and they're all actually the same. And right, like when we talk about yoga, particularly with mantras or even meditation and ayahuasca, these are vibrational frequencies. And I'm gonna, at the risk of sounding very new age, like they are like literally, right, and quantum physics can validate this, are vibratory currents that you can tap into to essentially shift out of your default mode of consciousness. And that unlocked a lot of creativity. And it was when I started writing. And, one cool thing after returning from that first ayahuasca experience is I had been doing a lot of yoga and practicing my handstands, wasn't able to do it. When I came back, I was just able to balance in a handstand. And so there are things like
Wow.
that are like, we're just like, whoa, where did this come from? And then I started singing and writing, and my creativity just, it's not like the ayahuasca did this. The ayahuasca just helped remove some barriers to my own creativity that were in place that I had constructed against myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be very helpful in that domain. And there's a lot of nuance too. I would like to mention when people maybe consider doing this type of work, but I'll just pause there for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a beautiful story. I think it's very common to have the love and light first experience with ayahuasca.
Yeah.
It's very common. You get the gentle intro, and maybe not the second night, but usually pretty soon you get the other side of it. You get the light and the dark,
Mm-hmm.
and there's lessons on both sides. And I experienced transformation like you're the same way that you're talking about, where I was more in my heart. Like I really sort of I dropped some of my armor and the ways
Yeah.
that I was pretty insensitive with other people, with myself. I was pretty disconnected from my deeper purpose, my intuition. Didn't even think I had intuition. And getting that intro to these medicines, to ayahuasca and to psilocybin, really shifted some of that for me. And all of a sudden, yeah, I was more. It was like the way it feels is like I became more myself by
Mm-hmm.
breaking down who I was in those ceremonies. Like if you take enough of these substances, everything breaks apart into different pieces. Your
Yeah.
name's over there in the corner, and your relationships are over there in another corner, and gravity at some times, like, you don't even know where up it is. Like, time can stop, and so everything's sort of exploded into a million pieces, and then everything reconstitutes from that place as you slowly come back. And it can be a terrifying place, of course. Your ego's freaked out. But the way that things reconstitute, it seems, if you can stay calm, relax, pay attention, bring a level of consciousness to your experience, that the way they come back together is a little bit more, let's say, aligned with, um, I don't know, your true purpose, or like, yeah, what feels um, right, you
Uh-huh.
know,
Right.
like more pure, more essential. And I really hear that in your story. And um, I think, yeah, one thing to speak on is I have an article on my website that says I healed my addiction with ayahuasca, and that's a very bold title. And um, I wrote the title to be bold, so that
Right.
people
Right.
could look at it. But
Got to play
um,
the game, man.
you got to play the game. But
Yeah.
um, I I don't mean to write that article and to put that message out there to say that everybody can heal their addiction with ayahuasca. Everybody should do ayahuasca. Um,
Uh-huh.
my path was my path, and I really just want to share that it could be someone else's path. I've seen it be your path. You know,
Right.
different story, but similar threads. Um, it it can take, if you've got a few pieces left that need to get lodged into the right place. Ayahuasca can do that for you. You can, if you really need to open your heart and connect deeper to yeah, a spiritual outlook on the world, ayahuasca can do that for you. And if that's your missing piece, you know that's a big deal.
Right.
But it's not going to happen for everyone. So yeah, that's an important disclaimer. And it's not a um, something that can fix you, right? Your brand, deep
Right.
fix, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, th- there's the short fix, which you were focusing on for a decade or so, And then there's the deep fix, which is the deep work that you're doing now. And that's not just taking a substance and it fixes you. It's your consciousness, your intention, your ability to work with the medicine through the light
Right.
and through the dark, right? Through those hard times where you think uh, something really bad is about to happen, or your mind is telling you uh, that this needs to happen, or you think there's a demon over here and it's trying to kill you. Um, it's your ability to um, stay calm and grounded in those moments, and not
Hmm.
sometimes not believe everything that you think either, right?
Right. 100%. Yeah. And I really appreciate you laying that out there. And I think this is a good launching pad to say a couple things. So the first being that if I'm being very honest, which I try to do these days, is that going into that first ceremony when I was a year into recovery, there was a part of me that was like, well, maybe you'll use this time to say, do I want to, are you ready to start drinking and smoking cannabis again? I knew that, I mean, just physically, I could never touch my other drugs of choice again. And then after that ceremony, I was like, why the hell would I ever smoke or change anything about who I am? Because I was so in love with the person who I was. And
Yeah.
so I think that was just, I had to learn that, for
Mhm.
myself. And actually, ironically, counterintuitively, doing that really, yeah, just further propelled me on a path of recovery
Mhm.
and sobriety
Yeah.
in new ways. And I feel, I try to be careful using that word because it can mean a lot to people. But one of the things that I also advocate for, and one of the reasons why I do this work around ayahuasca. Um, so let me first just say that I'm an advocate of intentional psychedelic use. And I think that there often is this narrative that entheogens and tryptamines, psychedelics from the earth, they are superior to the ketamines and the MDMAs, et cetera, where you're doing those typically in a more sterilized therapeutic environment. And I
Mhm.
just want to say that I think that there's that's not the whole truth. Those there's deep therapeutic benefits from all those. But when it comes to ayahuasca and when it comes to an addict like myself, being immersed. And so after that first ceremony, I then worked up the courage to go down to the Amazon jungle and stay with the Shipibo tribe. And I did a dieta in the middle of the jungle in a hut for a week, eating nothing but a bowl of lentils once a day and doing many ceremonies and being immersed in an indigenous way of living, where you are doing a ceremonial sacrament that you cannot score on Turk and Leavenworth in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. You can't get ayahuasca at a Fish concert.
Mhm.
Um, it has a reverse tolerance where the more you do it, the more sensitive you become to it. Um, for all those reasons, I actually think it's very safe for people who have a history with, or I shouldn't say very safe. It can't, in the right setting with the right people at the right time, it
Mhm.
can be very, very safe. Um, Now, also for me, when you participate in an ayahuasca ceremony, you're not just drinking the medicine and then laying down on your mat, but there is this beautiful, intricate order of incense and music and harmonica and drums and
Mhm.
a true ritualized ceremony that is held in a lineage when you're doing it in the right place, which is just with the right people, which is so important. Like
Yeah.
I can't stress how critical it is to do it with truly experts. Like, if you were Tim Ferriss popularized the saying where if you were going to get brain surgery, you wouldn't go on Instagram to find your brain surgeon.
Yeah.
You would do a ton of research.
Yeah.
And so, um, however, like that, being immersed in that ceremony where people are singing and dancing and crying and vomiting, and you're witnessing the full spectrum of the human experience and psyche really laid bare and held in like a celebratory manner, that for me was the rite of passage, the ritual, a deeper sense of meaning that I felt was always missing in my
Mhm.
life.
Mhm.
And it also, and I think this is why psychedelics, sometimes can be called ecodelics, because in my case, it, converted me to, I started eating much more vegetarian, and I went full on vegan for a while. I got over myself around that. But, it really began to see that we are a part of a living earth in a living system, and we are not separate, and that the fungi fuel the plants, and the plants fuel the animals, and the animals fuel us, and there's a symbiote, like all the cheesy stuff that is actually on a metaphysical level deeply true. That was a big shift in my worldview doing this type of
Mm-hmm.
work. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not against the more synthetic approaches, but for all those reasons is why I gravitate and feel okay about recommending this type of approach.
Mm-hmm. I remember saying after my first ceremony, it was 2 nights. We were driving home, and I had this realization. I had known that Dr. Gabor Mate is a big dude up here. I mean, he's a big dude in the world now, but he's from Vancouver, and so um, I had my eye on his work for a long time, and we were driving home, and I said, "Wow, now I know why Gabor Mate works with this medicine. Like, I get it. I feel
Yeah.
I just had an uh, otherworldly experience, but I feel more myself. I feel more at peace, and I feel like I want to drink alcohol less, and I
Yeah.
want to smoke cannabis less. I don't want to
Right.
run from anything. I want to just breathe this air and just be present and feel happy to be alive, one moment at a time." And so, yeah, I really resonate with what you're talking about around how it almost has the reverse effect. It has this reverse tolerance, and it
Yeah.
connects you to what you needed in the first place when you went looking to drugs to make you feel more connected to yourself, to other people, right? To
Precisely.
spirit. Like alcohol used to be called spirits, which is quite
Right.
interesting,
Hmm.
right? You're going to take in spirits when you drink alcohol. It's like the yeah, there's an analogy there. So the other piece that I wanted to speak about was the ceremony that you're talking about and how important that is. And I definitely resonate with what you're talking about in terms of sterile. There's the substance on its own in a sterile environment, and then there's a substance as held by a community, right?
Hmm.
And and that's what we want the most, right? Is to be connected to community. That's one of the biggest parts of 12-step programs that helps people recover is that
Right.
fellowship. There's the
Hmm.
program and there's the fellowship. Those are the two main things that really make it work for people. And in this case, there's the medicine and there's the ceremony and the community around the ceremony, right? It's very
Yeah.
important to plug into a community that really feels rich and like they really know what they're doing, right? And that ceremony is the container that's going to hold you when you're blown into 1,000 pieces.
Uh-huh.
And that
Right.
the container is the thing that you're going to trust when you want to freak out and be like, "Oh my God, I'm not okay,"
Right.
and really lose it, knowing that you've got a driver in the driver's seat and that you've got a group and this sort of a lot of times ceremonies are done in a perfect circle in this maloka.
Yeah.
It feels like you're in a
Yeah.
spaceship. It's like, don't get off the ship, just stay in stay in here with
Yeah.
us. And that trust helps get you through a 10 out of 10 off your rocker experience and come back with uh, the gifts that can come from that, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
beautiful, man. Yeah.
Yeah. And to riff on that for a moment, that the losing it, I can speak in my journey in that second night, because what it did for me was it made me really wonder, like, what is this? What did I uncork? Because I
Hmm.
didn't understand this lack of control, and how my rationalist mind that I so prized tried to make sense of it was that I had experienced insanity, and maybe insanity lives inside me. And what is insanity other than like a lack of control and a true right? And then when we think of it on a deeper level, like, what about the collective insanity, and what about the ways in which we're living, that are so out of alignment? And so I really started to unpack that, and having been fortunate to be raised and groomed and trained in a community that is truly with leaders in this field, I didn't, I never enjoyed this, but there's been a handful of times when I've truly lost my shit, needed help, like crying, type of screaming, and that can happen. And these are very powerful psychotechnologies, and they are amplifiers of the unconscious. And so, just to, again, to stress that, like, these, having how critical it is to have people who know what they're doing, and in my case, not only having the indigenous lineage and training, but then also the Western framework. I really believe that when Westerners are drinking ayahuasca, it's very helpful to not only have the folks who know and are steeped in an indigenous lineage. And what that means is not, you know, um, some sexy woman or man dressing up as a shaman on Instagram who's been doing this for like a couple of years, but someone who has like decades
Mm-hmm.
of experience. And
Mm-hmm.
then also, in my case, happened to be trained in the Western psychodynamic
Uh-huh.
framework. So you have that understanding, because when you're dealing with, and this is one of the things that I've learned, and when you're bringing a Westerner into an indigenous culture in the Amazon, and by the way, there's the whole nother conversation around whole reciprocity and appropriation and being in right relationship, which is so important to carrying this work. But when a Westerner comes down and drinks this medicine, it can be very harsh on the system. Whereas for them, it's just another Thursday night,
Yeah. Yeah.
where it, like in the dream world, in the spirits, in the animistic sense of like serpents in the environment being alive, that's just more embedded into their framework. But for a Westerner, it can be very destabilizing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's extremely helpful to have not only someone who is versed in those mystical realms, but then also is steeped in, like, we're talking the conscious, the unconscious, all the ways in which, the psychological um, happenings, or we self-organize as
Mm-hmm.
Westerners. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a very rare person, right? I think a lot of times that ends up having to be two different people working together, right?
Yeah.
Um, because yeah, from what I know about, well, first of all, there's a language barrier, right? But um, a lot of the time, but curanderos, vegetalistas, they spend all of their time training in this plant medicine realm and dieting and gaining their own allies in that realm, and that's where they're comfortable. That's where they become masterful. And so to ask someone like that to also um, study Western psychology and understand how to perhaps facilitate uh, group discussion around, what did you see, what came up for you, how does this relate to your life,
Right.
is an obvious um, gap, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think this is why Gabor saw that clearly. He
Yeah.
went to the jungle. He saw, like, oh, this is like a masterful application of such a powerful tool, and I have the experience facilitating groups. And if we combine the two, we've got something next
Right.
level, and that's become the ultimate model, right? is
Exactly.
is combining both sides. Use the tools from South America and use the facilitation and the understanding of psychology and um, group discussion
Hmm.
to uh, pre I don't have the right word, to like dig in beforehand to get ready,
Right.
uh,
Yes.
and then to integrate afterwards.
Yeah.
Could
Yeah.
call it pre-integration, right?
Right.
Pre-integration, and then the ceremony happens, and then there's an integration afterwards, or a post integration conversation, multiple conversations. That's become the standard now.
Yeah.
They're doing that with the MDMA therapy. So this is probably a good time to talk about um, Natura and how this came to you and how it came to be. Natura is a program that you're one of the founders of, and it's actually the main reason I wanted to have you on the show, because
Yeah.
I'm so passionate about this model and what you're doing here. This is uh, this is how I would say the right way to do ayahuasca.
Hmm.
Is
Yeah.
when it's held in this way, and when I do it with my people, we do a similar type of thing on our own. So, yeah, tell me about Natura.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so, yeah, and thanks for clarifying that. I think you make a good point that like a lot of the places who are working with this in a responsible way, they have two people who can
Uh
help,
huh.
and yeah, they can bridge kind of the indigenous with the Western frameworks. And so, um, I am a co-founder of Natura Care Programs, and so yeah, we, maybe just to get like fast forward on my own journey, I my writing and writing about all these things as I was experiencing them ended up being quite rewarding for me. And then I ended up coaching folks, and I left tech after 5 years of recovery and rebuilding my tech career. And throughout, I was going deeper training in ayahuasca lineages. I took 2 trips to the Amazon, and I started working really closely with a community that is based of the Comensa lineage and community in Colombia, where I basically just kept showing up and doing the work. And I, I just want to say I catch myself being like doing the work. That's such a, I don't know, that's an overused phrase, right?
Yeah.
But I was working really hard to understand myself, to understand how to be a better person. And I was experiencing a lot of growth in my own life and teaching yoga and really blossoming in a way that I never knew was possible. And I began to develop a relationship with these, two of my mentors in this community. One is Selena De Leon and Todd Young. Selena is the founder of Circle of Sacred Nature Church. She's also a Stanford grad and a Fulbright scholar and masters of divinity, like just truly like remarkable human on the
Yeah.
training team at the Berkeley Center of Psychedelics. And Todd Young's, who you and I have talked about, and you'll have to have him on and connect with, because like I just know I've sent him some of your podcasts, and he
Mm.
really appreciates your perspective. He is a pioneer in the use of psychedelics in a 12-step recovery contract, like a true pioneer and somewhat of a legend in that space. And we started brainstorming like what would it look like if we applied traditional ayahuasca healing with an interdisciplinary approach to recovery. And so
Mm.
what we mean by that is actually teaching people contemplative practice, how to meditate, how to actually hold this work, and having a real structure behind preparatory work and integration,
Mm.
all geared at addiction. And this started probably 3 years ago, and we kept talking and talking, and then things really heated up. And we've gone to market, and we have an amazing advisory board of addiction psychiatrists, psychedelic researchers, contemplative social scientists, and support from guys like Paul Stamets, who's the legendary mycologist, and Project New Day, which is a psychedelic organization, nonprofit geared towards addicts. And we actually have a full scholarship fund for people to attend our program, which is NCP is it's a 3-month longitudinal program that combines an online curriculum.
Mm.
So what that looks like is individual counseling, group counseling, videos teaching prep work and meditation, contemplative practice, all geared at preparing folks for a 2-week retreat at Posada Natura, which is our retreat center in Costa Rica, a truly magical place. And there'll be 3 ceremonies there, and then 6 weeks of integration on the back end, with work, the same type of counseling and process oriented recovery. And one of the things that makes us unique outside of just having the real structure behind integration is that we're offering in-person stays for people to do nature immersions at Posada in Costa Rica, to actually do the back half of that program in nature. In our belief being that nature can actually be quite a strong healing force with
Mm.
addiction. Um, And then for those who have more acute needs, we have Todd is the founder of Recovery Nexus, which I recently joined the board of. It's sober living in Seattle, Washington. That
Huh.
is friendly and supportive of psychedelic for spiritual usage. And so we actually, for people who have acute needs, and like, I'm not ready to go back to my environment. They can come stay at Recovery Nexus in Seattle and do the back half of the program there. And so, yeah, this that's kind of how it came to be. And it's, I never really intended, or if you would have told me 6 years ago that I'd be working in this space, I would have been surprised. But it feels very meaningful to be able to do this in a way that is responsible, particularly in light of, and then also it's a nonprofit, and we take a lot of pride in that, in light of a lot of the stuff that's happening in a very noisy space at the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet one that is still pretty important, I believe, personally.
Wow, man, it is so important. And I'm just thinking back to, an hour ago when we were talking about you're flying high at Twitter, doing all the drugs in the world, and um, thinking that you're winning at life, and really you're just like on a slow downward slide, and you've been out of integrity the whole time, with your what you really truly want and what you're ultimately here to do,
Mhm.
and what a difference now, like just to touch back on how you started writing and singing after that first ceremony,
Mhm.
like folks, Alex is a fantastic writer. You are a fantastic writer, man.
Mhm.
Your blogs, which sort of also come in the form of a newsletter, are very engaging. And when I'm like burning through emails and I see one of
Mhm.
yours, I mark it as unread, and I don't tick it off until I've gone back and read it, because
Mhm.
you just have a really beautiful way of seeing the world and articulating that through writing. And so just knowing that, like, in college this is what you studied, and then you spent this whole section of time just working in
Mhm.
finance and in tech,
Yeah.
and knowing now, like, what a good writer you are, I'm like, oh, like, it just hurts to see how much time you spent in that place, but you had to
Yeah.
do that. You had to do that to find yourself and to get here.
Yeah.
And then add to that the fact that you're helping people with plant medicine, and you're doing this in such a good way, you know, such a good
Mhm.
way. And you've trained in so many other modalities that you're integrating: yoga, Kundalini yoga, and I know Hakomi is really
Yeah.
big for you. You're Hakomi trained, and um, somatic, and this is the way. This is the way, man. A 3 month program. So just to come back to Natura, um, how do people get into your program? When does it launch? You guys are about to launch the first
Yeah.
iteration, right?
Well, first, thank you so much, Ben. For the kind words, it is deeply received, and also I want to just give a shout out to you. I mean, yeah, yeah. So for like full disclosure, like Ben has been a coach of mine, and like you were the one who really gave me the nudge to say, you need to write about this addiction, because I was writing a newsletter, I was writing about all my philosophies and kind of
Right.
skirting around this, and this is several years ago now, and you were the first one to be like, you just need to get over yourself. And I still was concerned about sharing. And you told me, if you put this out there, it will come back to you. And you were gave me a real nudge to do this. And I
Hmm.
did. And now it's kind of funny that I even had any doubts about that. But so thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. And
Yeah.
because I, have so much to owe you. And, and something I'll share that is like very exciting in my world is like, I just signed with a literary agent, and so it's like someone who also believes in me, and and so it's, if you would to write about breaking free from the machine and addiction and all that, and if just looking back to those conversations that we had, it's very meaningful for me. And we talk about imposter syndrome, like even still, after writing something like 140 essays, publishing them, getting published in outlets, I still was like, oh, I'm not a writer. And so,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's funny how we play these games. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyways,
My wife plays those same games. She's like, I'm not a
right.
writer, and she was
Yeah.
really struggling writing in the beginning of writing her book, and her whole community and including me, was like, no, you are a writer. You are a writer. You have to believe us. You have to believe us. Just keep moving
Totally.
forward. Right. So I'm glad that I could, be part of the cheerleading team for you, my man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, writers are we're a particularly like self-hating group of people. Any writer who tells you differently is probably full of it.
Right.
But yeah, and let alone Shay is like already impacted millions of people with her writing, and is writing probably a bestseller. Can't wait. So yeah, it just shows you at every level people are experiencing that. But anyway, so yeah, Natura Care Programs we have launched. So it's Natura careprograms.org. You can also find, if you go to deepfix.co and in my website, you can find links there. We've officially gone to market. Our first cohort launches in July. We've received a lot. It's made a nice splash in the psychedelic space and the addiction space. And so we've received a lot of interest already. And so would encourage people to apply soon if they're interested in that first cohort. Also, because of the generous support of our donors like Paul Stamets and Project New Day, we have scholarships to give, right? Where people can either get full or partial rides because this type of work can be expensive, and not to mention even traditional addiction treatment programs, which we are not. And so encourage folks to apply. Particularly, we're trying to give scholarships to veterans and those who need it most. And so, yeah, one thing that I'll just say on that is like we have a very intensive application process because this work is not for everyone. There's nuance, and it's particularly not for everyone with addiction. And so, ayahuasca, like breath work, like yoga, has contraindications. And so, we have a full team, and we have medical form, addiction history, a very intensive process that involves interviewing and checking at every stage to ensure that this is going to be right. And our commitment is to provide a safe container for folks to go through what hopefully will be a transformative journey. And so, yeah.
That's amazing, man. I'm so glad you guys are launching, and I'm so glad that you have that process to make sure that it's a right fit for people. You know, for people listening, if you have a history of bipolar, uh, schizophrenia, severe depression, and you're on SSRIs or SNRIs, psychosis, um, these are, uh, ayahuasca may not be for you. And this is what these forms catch when people are coming to these programs. And some people don't do these kinds of histories, and they will just let you drink, right? And so
Right.
just another warning sign for people, like, you really want it. If you want to enter into this world, you want to have to go through a bit of a gauntlet just to get there. That way, those people give a shit, and
Right.
they're doing it right. And
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, if someone's exploring this and they're not asking you for a full medical form or history, like you should run the hell away from that
yeah,
as fast as you
yes,
can.
yeah,
Um, and and yeah, I mean, and we're hoping to even like go a layer further because as you know, and this is not the case with everyone, but folks with experience of substance misuse or process, we're not just targeting substances, but also process addictions like screens, pornography, gambling, work, shopping, exercise.
hmm,
All addiction manifests in so many ways, but there can be a tendency to stretch the truth, to
yep,
to put it kindly.
yep,
And so that's why we're providing many layers of application, and then also doing like a Zoom interview with one of our program directors, myself or someone else from our team, Todd or Selena or else, to ensure that we can really feel good about this person joining, and for their safety, right, and for the
hmm,
group safety as
hmm.
well.
Well, Alex, I look forward to hearing the testimonials from this. I look forward to hearing your stories after a couple cohorts. I'd love to have you on in a year or a bit, just to talk about how this has been going for you and what you've been learning and how you folks are refining the process. I have a dream of starting a treatment center someday, probably
Yeah.
here in Canada, that integrates, quote, state of the art,
Yeah.
processes, including psychedelics, as well as, just indigenous is state of the art these days, right? Back to nature, sweat lodge, things like that. And so I'm personally really interested in the way that you construct a program like this to leverage the power of plant medicines,
Yeah.
psychedelics, and deepen the potency of the healing process for people. So um,
Mm.
definitely let's stay in touch about this. Let's do another episode
Yeah.
and dig in deeper. I think this is probably the longest episode I've ever recorded. Like you and I could just go forever on this stuff. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah, we have to cap it at some point. Yeah, and thank you so much, for having me on to talk about this. Feel free to cut whatever needs to be cut. And yeah, we're in the process now of finalizing an observational study with the University of Washington and UCSF in San Francisco. And so, yeah, we're hoping to have a little bit more, another layer of testimonial and
mhm.
behind the project. And so, yeah, would love that.
Great, brother. Anything else? Where can people find you? People need to definitely find Deep Fix, get on the newsletter. And if you're on Instagram,
Yeah, yeah. So deepfix.co is my website. I write the newsletter similarly titled Deep Fix. And it's also a community. And so it's a lot of folks who are in recovery, but not just folks in recovery, and yogis and therapists. And we have a Discord server where we interact and we host biweekly dialogue discussions and book clubs. And so right now that's free, and really want anyone to join who is like-minded and some of these topics resonate. And so that is something very rewarding, is hosting that and founding that community. Let's see what else. And then on Twitter, I'm at Oloal, OLOAL. Same on Instagram. Not as active on Instagram, but definitely still have a
mhm,
presence there.
mhm.
And then Natura Care Programs.org is our program site.
Fantastic, man. Alex Olshonsky, it was a pleasure to have you on the show, man. Feel like this was a long time coming, and what a good conversation.
Yeah, Ben. Well, just thank you so much, and I just want to say, like, yeah, getting to meet you was so significant this year, and cool that like how well we got to know each other, and how well you can get to know a person just
Yeah,
through Zoom. But
yeah,
yeah, you have like what I think the word I was like thinking about you, and like the word that comes to mind is zest. Like you have a zest for life,
yeah.
which
Right.
is like infectious, and yeah, just thank you for bringing that into the world.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, brother. Thank you for bringing your heart and your strong mind to benefit humanity. Like all of these things that you're so interested in have coalesced into um, an amazing teacher and healer. And I'm really excited to see um, how many people you help in this world. Thank you, brother. Thanks
Mm,
for coming on the show.
yeah, pleasure. Thanks, Ben.